Do you ever stand on your own lawn holding a coffee only to realize the HOA president is trying to have you arrested for turning off your own water? Because that was me, barefoot, caffeinated, and completely unprepared for the moment a sheriff's deputy raised his hand between us like we were two toddlers fighting over a juice box. "Ma'am, step back. You're on private land." Clarissa Belmont, HOA royalty in yoga pants and pearls, jabbed a manicured finger toward me and shrieked something about water theft. Yes, theft of water from my own well. The deputy blinked. I blinked. Somewhere a squirrel stopped mid-chew to watch. And all I could think was, so this is what happens when you move to the country to get some peace. Drop a comment if someone's ever tried to tell you what you can do on your own land. Because this wasn't just an argument over boundaries, it was the opening shot of a personal war she wouldn't see coming. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I'd bought 5 acres of quiet earth after my divorce. A little scarred, but still mine. No mortgage, no landlord, no nosy neighbors. At least, that's what the listing promised. I was ready to rebuild my life, one solar panel at a time. After 15 years in the corporate grind, I'd left my job consulting on renewable systems and decided to practice what I preached. Off-grid living, sustainable design, the kind of independence you don't just talk about at a TEDx conference, but actually live out in boots and flannel. The realtor said there was no HOA, county zoning only. You can even collect rainwater, she said, like she was handing me keys to a castle made of common sense. I should have known the devil drives a Tesla and carries a clipboard. The first time I met Clarissa Belmont, she pulled into my gravel driveway like she owned the soil. White Tesla, designer sunglasses, casual blouse that probably cost more than my workshop budget. She stepped out smiling like a campaign poster and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Clarissa. I run the Silver Ridge Meadows HOA just over that ridge." I wiped drywall dust off my hands and shook hers. "Thanks, but I think you've got the wrong property. This lot isn't part of Silver Ridge." Her smile dimmed just a tick, like someone had lowered her wattage. "Well, technically, the boundaries are a bit fluid," she said, like HOA jurisdiction was a vibe. "The last owner agreed to uphold certain community standards, nothing formal, of course, but we value consistency." I nodded politely, the way you do when someone offers you a poisoned cookie with a bow on top. "I bought this land because it was independent," I said. "I'm building a self-sustaining demo site. Solar, water recycling, maybe even a wind turbine if the zoning permits." She tilted her head. "Interesting," she said, like a cat eyeing a fish tank. "We'll need to talk about that. The thing is, I don't mind rules. I mind rules written in invisible ink and enforced with a smile sharp enough to slice drywall. Within 2 weeks, I got a letter on Silver Ridge Meadows HOA letterhead. Not legal, just persuasive. It listed several violations: exposed construction, visible solar equipment, and, my personal favorite, incompatible aesthetic materials. It ended with a $750.00 community improvement fee, which is HOA speak for pay up or we gossip you into compliance. I called Danny Keller, my friend from college who'd gone into real estate law and now specialized in exactly this kind of suburban madness. She laughed so hard I could hear her chair creak. "Evan, that's not a violation notice. That's a very expensive piece of fiction. You owe them nothing." I framed it anyway, hung it next to my breaker panel, felt like the HOA equivalent of getting your first parking ticket in Manhattan. What I didn't realize then, what none of us realize until it's too late, is that this wasn't about violations or aesthetics. It wasn't even about property values. It was about power. About one woman trying to bend the world back into the shape she thought it should be, using bylaws and fear the way some people use hedge trimmers. By the time that sheriff's deputy stood between us on my lawn, I'd already gotten a taste of what was coming. But that moment, that ridiculous accusation of water theft, that was the first time I realized Clarissa Belmont wasn't just annoyed by my presence. She was terrified of my example. Because the second you prove that you can live well outside her rules, the whole system starts to crack. And cracks, well, they let the light in. I wasn't running away from my old life, exactly. It was more like walking away slowly without making eye contact, hoping it didn't follow me. After the divorce, I needed something solid. Something that didn't judge me for the years I'd spent trying to hold a marriage together with duct tape and optimism. So I cashed out what I could, cut my losses, and found this little 5-acre property just outside of town. The house was a fixer-upper in the truest sense. Floors that creaked like they were telling secrets, a roof with commitment issues, and plumbing that hissed at me like it had opinions. But it had good bones. Better bones than I did at the time. No HOA, no mortgage, just me, the trees, and enough room to build the kind of off-grid demo site that had lived in my dreams for years. Freedom, as it turns out, smells a lot like mildew and old cedar. At least at first. But freedom with potential? That'll hook a man every time. I didn't just stumble into this land either. I researched the county's zoning like I was studying for the bar exam. I checked plat maps, easements, historical boundaries, even went down a YouTube rabbit hole about rural property law that ended with a guy in a cabin yelling about sovereign citizenship. I stopped short of that. I wasn't trying to start a militia. I just wanted to install solar panels without getting a fine for violating the colonial character of the neighborhood. The listing said, no HOA. The agent confirmed, you're outside the development. Even the county clerk, bless her and her rhinestone glasses, said, oh yeah, they've been trying to pull that parcel into the HOA for years, but it never stuck. That should have been a red flag. Instead, I treated it like a quirky footnote, like saying a house is cozy when it's technically one hallway. Then came the Tesla. It pulled into my gravel driveway like it was offended by the dust. Out stepped Clarissa Belmont, wearing a silk blouse, high-waisted jeans that probably required a mortgage of their own, and sunglasses so large I half expected them to have their own zip code. She moved like someone who always expects the ground to cooperate. Welcome to the neighborhood, she said, extending a hand. Her voice was polished, like someone who used the word artisanal unironically. I'm Clarissa. I run the HOA over at Silver Ridge Meadows just beyond the tree line. I shook her hand. Warm skin, firm grip. But her eyes? Ice flows. Not angry, not aggressive, just cold enough to make you wonder if she'd ever blinked during a hurricane. Appreciate the welcome, I said carefully. But this property isn't in Silver Ridge, it's county land, and I confirmed there's no HOA jurisdiction here. She smiled wider, but somehow smaller. Well, the boundaries are a little fluid, she said, like community law was watercolor. And just like that, the air around us changed. Clarissa didn't argue. Not then, no, that would have been too direct. She just looked past me like I was the placeholder for something shinier. Her gaze swept over the property, the workshop in progress, the disassembled solar panels by the porch, the stack of reclaimed wood I'd been drying for siding. We value consistency in our neighborhood, she said. Community standards are what maintain property values, after all. I smiled back with the exact amount of polite disinterest I reserved for timeshare pitches. This place is my new start, I said. It's not part of your HOA, and I've got the documentation to prove it. She nodded, slowly, the way someone does when they're already writing a rebuttal in their head. Then she handed me a glossy brochure. Silver Ridge Meadows, a premier living community, like it was a summons wrapped in graphic design. Our next meeting is Thursday evening, she added. You should come. It's important to understand how we do things here. Then she left. Didn't even look back. But the sound of those tires on gravel, it stayed with me longer than it should have. And when someone's exit leaves a louder impression than their greeting, you know trouble's still circling. The next morning, I met Joan. She was out walking her dog, big old mutt named Pickles with one ear that flopped sideways like it had seen some things. Joan was in her late 60s, retired librarian, denim jacket with a patch that read, "Read Banned Books." We hit it off instantly. I saw Clarissa's spaceship in your driveway yesterday, she said, squinting into the sun. Let me guess, she smiled, handed you propaganda and tried to annex your property by vibes. I laughed. That about sums it up. Joan's face darkened just a little. You should know. She's been trying to pull properties like yours under HOA control for years. Last guy, Mike something, he held out for a while. Wind turbine consultant, I think. She ran him ragged. County complaints, rumors. Even called the fire marshal once because he had a wood stove. My stomach dropped a little. He sold at a loss. Just wanted out. Joan finished. Then she patted Pickle's head like it grounded her. You seem just document everything. I thanked her, but my brain was already buzzing. Wind turbines, complaints, fluid boundaries. The pieces weren't falling into place yet, but they were definitely lining up like dominoes. And let's be honest, you don't line up dominoes unless you're planning to knock something over. I walked back to the house and looked out at the land again. Same trees, same sun, same creaky porch, but it felt different now, like someone had taken a Polaroid of peace and scribbled in the corner, "Enjoy it while it lasts." Clarissa's smile wasn't a welcome, it was a warning label, and while I hadn't realized it then, I'd just walked into a cold war, me, my off-grid dreams, and 5 acres of hard-earned freedom versus an HOA queen with a brochure and boundary issues. The smart thing would have been to keep my head down, finish the house, blend in. But I didn't buy this place to blend in. I bought it to breathe, and if breathing meant getting on the wrong side of Clarissa Belmont, then I guess I'd better start working on my oxygen reserves. Stick around. This smile war was just getting started. I should have known something was brewing when I found an envelope taped to my mailbox, sealed with that same logo from Clarissa's brochure. Silver Ridge Meadows HOA, elegant serif font like it had a law degree. Inside was a 2-page letter, written in language so formal it made the Constitution look like a grocery list. It cited multiple aesthetic violations, which included exposed solar equipment, visible renovation debris, and my personal favorite, incongruent materials disrupting community harmony. I didn't know reclaimed barnwood could disrupt harmony, but apparently my siding was one flake of paint away from civil unrest. The cherry on top was a demand for a $750, 0 cents community improvement fee to remedy the issues. Voluntary, of course, in the same way a ransom note politely asks you to cooperate. I stared at the letter, part laughing, part boiling, and thought Clarissa wasn't just flexing power, she was test-driving intimidation. I scanned every page and forwarded them to Danny Keller, my friend from college and now my unofficial HOA deflector shield. She called me within minutes, her voice loaded with that special brand of legal amusement she reserved for nonsense. "Evan," she said, "this isn't just shady. It's wannabe fraud in a brochure dress." She walked me through the letter's lack of legal standing, explaining that without actual jurisdiction, they had no more power over my land than a kid with a walkie-talkie has over airport traffic. "They're trying to fake authority, hoping you'll fold to the pressure," she said. "Don't respond to it formally, but definitely start a paper trail. If this escalates, we'll need proof of the pattern." That word stuck with me, pattern. I'd always associated that with quilting or wallpaper. Now it was the legal blueprint for how to fight a suburban coup. The next sign of escalation wasn't a letter, it was a Facebook group. A neighbor tipped me off. Clarissa had created an invite-only page called Preserve Silver Ridge's Character. The name alone sounded like it was written in cursive and scented with lavender. The content, however, was anything but gentle. There were photos of my unfinished siding, close-ups of my solar racks, and captions that read like neighborhood gossip weaponized into propaganda. Industrial eyesore threatening home value, and unregulated structures endangering Silver Ridge's appeal. I hadn't realized there was such a thing as aesthetic terrorism, but apparently I was its new face. It was like being on a wanted poster, except the crime was disrupting the curated charm. I wouldn't have minded so much if it hadn't worked. Because suddenly people stopped waving. The couple down the road who used to chat about dogs now avoided eye contact like I was contagious. The guy at the hardware store who once offered to help load my lumber asked if I was still building that junkyard. The shift was subtle but sharp. Overnight, I'd become that guy, the one ruining the view, the outsider with too many opinions and not enough decorative wreaths. I wanted to laugh it off. Who cared what people thought? But it gets under your skin when you realize perception trumps fact in a community built on manicured facades. And when rumors start to circulate faster than facts, even your truth begins to feel like a liability. That's when I knew I had to dig in. Not just emotionally, but literally. 2 weeks after the online smear campaign started, I came home to find a county vehicle parked near the end of my driveway. A young inspector named Mark stepped out, clipboard in hand, apologetic expression baked into his sunburn. "Got an anonymous complaint," he said. "Alleged environmental violations, improper equipment storage, unsafe solar setups, potential water runoff hazards." He was professional, polite, and clearly embarrassed to be there. I walked him around the property, showed him every permit, every labeled system, and every component installed to code. "This is cleaner than half the commercial setups I inspect," he said, signing off on the form. "But just so you know, if these complaints keep coming in, it might help to start documenting things. It doesn't stop them from filing, but it gives us something to work with." That was the last push I needed. The next morning, I installed 4 weatherproof cameras. 1 at the gate, 1 overlooking the well, and 2 along the shared property line. I even named them in my phone: Northwatch, Gatekeeper, Raineye, and Clarissa Cam. The third day after installation, Clarissa Cam caught something interesting. A landscaping crew wearing Silver Ridge HOA maintenance uniforms, casually trimming brush on my side of the marker line. They paused at each stake, looked around, and nudged them with boot tips and shovel handles. One guy bent over and repositioned a survey flag about 4 feet west, just enough to skew the perception of the boundary. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly clever, but it was deliberate. I watched the footage 3 times, then saved it twice. 1 copy for Danny, 1 for a fireproof box in my closet. Because this wasn't about landscaping, this was about redrawing maps through subtle sabotage, HOA type. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold beer and watched the sunset bleed into the trees. I thought about how quickly a dream can feel like a courtroom exhibit. How 5 acres of peace can turn into a chessboard when someone with power decides you don't fit their vision. Silver Ridge didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a silent cartel in yoga pants, armed with bylaws and brunch plans. But here's the thing about cartels. They hate exposure. And I was finally starting to see the shape of the war I was in. Stick around. Because the next move they made, it wasn't just petty. It was criminal. It started with another envelope, of course. This one wasn't taped to my mailbox. It was in it, like a piece of mail that had gone to finishing school. Crisp cream paper, embossed logo, faux official language, printed in a font that screamed, "We Googled government." According to Clarissa Belmont and her ever-expanding imagination, my well was now drawing from a shared community aquifer. The notice warned that unless I paid a $1,500.00 water impact fee and submitted my renovation plans for community approval, Silver Ridge Meadows would have no choice but to initiate protective measures. Protective measures. That's what medieval kingdoms used to call war. I held the notice up to the light, half expecting to find Clarissa's perfume embedded in the ink. It even had what looked like county seals across the bottom. Badly copied versions tilted slightly, like someone had forged them in Microsoft Paint after 2 glasses of Chardonnay. And that was the moment I realized, this woman wasn't just bold. She was building her HOA empire out of delusion and toner cartridges. I called Marcus Henley at the county water department, a guy who knew his wells better than most people know their own passwords. He laughed the minute I sent him the scan. "Evan, your system's a private well, drilled and documented before that development ever broke ground. It's not connected to any shared source." "Because there isn't one, and that logo? That's not ours. That's an old tourism badge from the Welcome Center." I thanked him, printed the email, and sealed it in a folder I now labeled Clarissa's Greatest Hits. But I also knew this wasn't the last of it. Because irrational power doesn't back down when caught, it doubles down. And Clarissa, God bless her, wasn't just irrational. She was motivated. So I did what any responsible property owner would do when faced with forged government threats. I locked down my well, installed proper seals, posted legal signage, and reinforced the access point to prevent tampering. It was my way of saying politely, "Back off," before I invoice your HOA for impersonating a municipality. The next morning, I was hosting a sustainable living workshop on site. A dozen curious folks standing under a pop-up canopy, sipping coffee and asking questions about rainwater harvesting. That's when the white Tesla pulled up. Clarissa stepped out in a navy pantsuit like she was running for Queen of Community Order. Behind her, an SUV rolled up with Silver Ridge security magnets slapped on the doors. Two guys in polos and earpieces flanked her like she was walking into a summit. She marched up to my fence and announced loud enough to echo, "We're here for the scheduled water inspection authorized by the Community Association." I stared at her, then at the crowd, then back at her, because this wasn't HOA enforcement, this was neighborhood theater. I walked up calmly, holding my binder of permits like it was the Constitution. "Clarissa, you and I both know this is nonsense. You have no jurisdiction, no scheduled inspection, and no authority to access this land. You're trespassing." She smiled, but it had that unhinged sparkle you see in reality show contestants right before they flip a table. "You're tampering with community water, Evan," she said, "and that's a criminal act." Then she did the unthinkable, pulled out her phone, dialed 9111, and declared she was reporting water theft. I turned around slowly to my workshop guests, all watching like it was a live-streamed court case. One guy leaned over to his wife and whispered, "This HOA reality show is wild." Another pulled out his phone, whether for video or just to text someone, "You will not believe this," I'll never know. But Clarissa was serious. Delusional, theatrical, but serious. And when the deputy showed up 15 minutes later, things got even more surreal. Deputy Laura Finch arrived in full small-town unimpressed mode. She stepped out of her cruiser with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who has seen too many backyard feuds and not enough common sense. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. Clarissa launched into a speech that used the phrase "shared aquifer" 5 times in 1 minute. She pointed to my sealed well and insisted I had denied access to community water infrastructure. I handed the deputy my permits, copies of the original land surveys, and Marcus's email from the water department. She reviewed them quietly, then turned to Clarissa. "Ma'am, this well is private, fully permitted, and predates your development. There's no shared water system here." Clarissa didn't blink. "He's running an illegal business," she added. "He's holding events. Educational workshops are prohibited in residential zones." I sighed, opened the folder again, and handed over my home occupation permit, explicitly allowing me to host small educational gatherings. Deputy Finch flipped through the paperwork, nodded, then turned back to Clarissa. "Ma'am," she said, her voice as dry as dust on a July porch, "that's not how property rights work." Clarissa's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a car alarm stuck mid-sentence. "You don't understand," she hissed, looking around at the guests now openly staring. "My husband is on the zoning board. We've sold homes to half the county commission. He will not tolerate this." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Belmont?" Clarissa went pale, then red. "This isn't over," she snapped, before storming back to her Tesla, her security team trailing behind like confused mall cops. The guests broke into whispers and quiet laughter. One woman turned to me and said, "You know, if this is what comes with sustainable living, I might just sign up." I smiled, but there was a knot in my gut that hadn't been there before. Clarissa hadn't just crossed a line. She'd done a pirouette on it, in heels, while holding a fake bag, and I had the feeling she was just getting started. Stick around, because next, she was about to meet the business end of a projector and a truth file. You ever walk into a meeting you weren't invited to, carrying a laptop full of receipts and a smile that says, "Let's dance"? That was me on a Tuesday evening, slipping into the back of the Silver Ridge Community Center where the HOA meeting was already in full spin cycle. Clarissa stood at the front of the room, flanked by a folding table, a fruit tray, and a projector that beamed her PowerPoint across a whitewashed wall. Title slide, Eyesores of Silver Ridge. Classy, she was midway through a dramatic breakdown of neighborhood aesthetics, slide by slide, when I spotted a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my solar array labeled Visual Contamination. I almost choked on the complimentary cookie. She'd turned sustainability into a threat level. I knew right then this wasn't a meeting. It was a roast. And my land was the punchline. Clarissa clicked to the next image, an artistically filtered shot of my unfinished workshop, then paused for effect. "This is what we're up against," she said, her voice firm, eyes scanning the crowd. "Unregulated structures, unapproved modifications, and a disregard for community harmony. This is how property values decline." A few residents nodded. One woman clutched her pearls, like my compost bins had personally insulted her begonias. I stood up slowly, calm as a Sunday sermon. "Excuse me," I said, "mind if I share a few slides of my own?" Clarissa froze, the projector paused, conversations hiccuped, a murmur ran through the room like a breeze before a thunderclap. I held up my laptop and added, "Should only take 15 minutes, but it'll answer a lot of questions." Clarissa's smile reappeared, thin and twitchy like it had been ironed on. "This meeting is for official HOA business. Unscheduled participation isn't permitted." I nodded. "Understood, but since you're using my property as Exhibit A, I think the room deserves Exhibit B through Z." That's when an older board member, Mr. Griffin I later learned, raised his hand. "Let him finish," he said, staring straight at Clarissa. "I'm curious." Silence. Clarissa took one step back. I moved forward, plugged in my laptop, and clicked to my first slide. Title: Documented Harassment and Fabricated Enforcement, a Timeline. A room went still, like the air had forgotten how to move. I started with the letters, projected them in full color, official-looking documents signed by Clarissa referencing non-existent codes and fictional committees. Then came the photos. Clarissa on my property, phone in hand, smiling like she was scouting for a listing, her security crew repositioning my survey stakes, screenshots from her online smear campaign, complaints filed with the county that were dismissed. Each one more absurd than the last. I played the video of her HOA landscapers accidentally pushing my boundary flags. Then the 911 call, Clarissa reporting water theft, followed by Deputy Finch's eye-roll-worthy reaction and official clearance. The audience shifted, jaws tightening. Clarissa stood frozen near the light switch, looking like she wanted to cut power to the entire zip code. But I wasn't done. I brought out the heavy hitters. Notarized statements from Joan, former neighbors, even the previous property owner, Mike, each detailing how Clarissa had used forged warnings, manipulated county contacts, and applied pressure until they either folded or fled. Then came the final slide, an email from the State Inspector General's office confirming that multiple reports were now under review, including the misuse of county seals and impersonation of official documents. The mood in the room shifted from tension to disbelief. Someone whispered, "This can't be real." I turned to the crowd and asked, "If your HOA president has lied this boldly for years, what else has she cost you?" You could hear a pin drop, and then a wallet snap shut. Clarissa tried to recover. "These are exaggerated, out-of-context claims," she stammered, eyes flicking to the board. "We've always acted with the community's best interest in mind." But it was too late. Rick Belmont, her husband, chose that moment to burst through the side door like a backup villain late to his own scene. "This man is threatening our community," he barked. "He's twisting facts and spreading misinformation." I calmly clicked to my last slide. Shared Liability and Legal Exposure. HOA Board Risk Summary. Bullet point 1. HOA boards that knowingly allow or fund fraudulent enforcement actions can be held jointly liable in civil court. That's when a woman in the front row, gray hair, gardening gloves still in her lap, said, "Excuse me, are you saying we could get sued because of them?" I nodded. "That's exactly what I'm saying." The room broke into whispers, arguments, and frowns sharp enough to file down a fence post. Board members huddled in the corner. Clarissa and Rick stood like marble statues at the end of a long, crumbling museum tour. I unplugged my laptop, nodded to the crowd, and said, "Thank you for your time. And for the record, solar panels don't lower property values. People like this do." The exit felt quieter than the entrance. I didn't need applause. The silence was its own reward. But if you think that was the end of it, think again. Because when reputations crack and truth gets projected, the fallout doesn't wait for permission. It lands loud, and the shockwave hadn't even hit the news cycle yet. Stick around. The next part? That's where the queen of curb appeal has to learn about compost. It took exactly 8 days for the ripples to turn into waves. I was drinking coffee on the porch, same mug, same sun size, when a white SUV pulled up my driveway. But this one didn't have HOA decals or a security crew in cargo shorts. It had a state seal on the door and a man named Inspector Raymond Holt from the Office of Municipal Oversight stepping out with a clipboard and a resting face that said, "I do not have time for decorative tyranny." I led him into my workshop, handed over my binder, the one thicker than a phone book, and watched as he flipped through the exhibits like a priest reading confession. He didn't say much, just nodded, asked a few clarifying questions, and muttered, "This goes a lot deeper than aesthetics." That was when I knew the HOA honeymoon was officially over. 2 weeks later, Rick Belmont, Clarissa's husband and part-time zoning whisperer, was formally charged with falsifying municipal documents and using his role on the planning board for personal leverage. The charges weren't earth-shattering, but they were loud enough to trigger an ethics review, and just like that, he was politely escorted out of county government like a man who'd shown up to a potluck with a subpoena. Clarissa, meanwhile, got hit where it hurt most, reputation. The local Realtors Association opened an investigation into her conduct. The HOA board voted her out of office in a 3-minute emergency session, and 3 of her clients withdrew listings with Monroe Properties, citing conflict of interest concerns. I imagine it felt like watching a 5-tier cake collapse in slow motion, expensive, messy, and impossible to salvage with frosting. And poetic? Oh, deeply poetic. What happened next? Well, that was the twist I didn't see coming. See, while Clarissa's social capital was tanking faster than a stock tip from a psychic, mine was doing the opposite. My property, the very one they called a visual contamination, got picked up by a local news feature. Sustainable Living in the Suburbs, One Man's Eco-Vision Breaks Barriers. Fancy title, but the real win was what followed. Requests. From homeowners, architects, even schools. People wanted to tour the site, learn the systems, ask about solar arrays and gray water filters like I'd been running a secret off-grid Hogwarts this whole time. "You should do a series," someone told me, like a real workshop. And I thought, why not? If Clarissa could weaponize aesthetics, maybe I could weaponize truth. So I did. I launched a weekend series, Green Living, Grounded Life. No gatekeeping, no clipboards, just open land, open ideas, and yes, compost toilets. The first Saturday I looked out at a group of 22 folks, retirees, young couples, a curious county employee or two, and sitting quietly near the back row, in jeans and a surprisingly normal blouse, Clarissa Belmont. No security guards, no clipboard, just her, a notebook, and that same forced smile, except this time, it didn't come with a brochure. During the Q&A, she raised her hand. I called on her like it was any other Thursday. "Would you be open," she asked, clearing her throat, "to letting a few of my new clients tour the property? They're looking for eco-features and, well, you've done something special here." I paused, smiled, and said, "Sure, long as they don't bring a drone." The crowd laughed. Clarissa chuckled too, a little late. Turns out she'd rebranded. Monroe Properties became Clarissa Green Living. Her Instagram swapped out flower beds and brick facades for solar tiles and rain gardens. She even did a podcast interview titled "How a Neighborhood Feud Changed My Career Path." She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew. The same woman who once called my compost bin a biological eyesore was now running ads that said, "Smart sustainability starts with smart design." And I got to admit, watching her explain gray water systems with mild competence, that was better than any courtroom sentence. Because sometimes justice isn't watching someone fall, it's watching them adjust the solar panel they swore would ruin the neighborhood. In the months that followed, Silver Ridge Meadows mellowed. The new HOA president, Joan's niece, a retired environmental engineer named Margot, loosened the aesthetic codes, started community garden days, and even invited me to give a talk at their annual meeting. I titled it, "Compost Toilets and Community Healing, A Journey." Clarissa came to that one too. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Rick, on the other hand, had taken up golf full-time, which is HOA code for no longer useful. Joan finally built the extension on her garage. People planted wildflowers. The tension softened. It felt like the land had taken a deep breath. Finally. So yeah, if there's a lesson in all this, it's not just document everything or install cameras with names. It's this: know your rights, build the binder, and never, ever trust a welcome basket with a brochure inside, because the HOA may come with muffins and smiles, but if their smiles don't reach their eyes, chances are, neither will their bylaws. And that's how I went from being that guy ruining the view to becoming the unofficial tour guide for sustainable living in a place that once tried to HOA me into oblivion. Funny how life works. I didn't set out to make a point, I just wanted to be left alone with my solar panels and maybe a quiet porch. But when someone tries to shrink your world to fit their control, you've got two choices: fold or build something too strong to bulldoze. I chose to build. And not just fences or workshops, but trust, clarity, and a big fat binder labeled, "Not today, Karen." In the end, it wasn't the lawsuits or the public shaming that changed things. It was the truth. Quiet, well-documented, undeniable truth. That's the part HOA rulebooks never account for. That people pay attention when you stand your ground with a smile, a permit, and a projector. The real win, it wasn't watching Clarissa lose power. It was watching her learn something from what she tried to destroy. Redemption doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it just shows up in a back row seat, taking notes in a compost toilet workshop. So if you've stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. Maybe you've had your own Clarissa. Maybe you've been hit with a bogus violation or watched someone weaponize community values like they came with a badge and a baton. Or maybe, just maybe, you've got a binder of your own building. If so, keep going. Because the next generation of neighborhood improvement might just be sitting quietly in a folding chair, learning how rainwater barrels work. Now, if this story gave you a laugh, a lesson, or just the warm satisfaction of watching poetic justice hit like a solar-powered freight train, do me a favor. Like the video, leave a comment, tell me your HOA horror story or your sweet revenge moment, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because, trust me, the next one, let's just say it involves a speed bump, a city planner, and one very angry golden retriever. Until then, know your rights, trust your gut, and if someone hands you a welcome brochure with a fake smile, run it through your shredder and your lawyer. See you next time.